Welcome back.
He was talking to me.
Guess we'll go ahead and review from last week. That's all right with everybody. If you did your homework. If you didn't do your homework, well, you're lucky because this time I'm not taking it up. All right. So first question. First question says, in 1917, Albert Einstein, you might have heard of him maybe at some point, realized that his general theory of relativity pointed to a universe with a beginning. Remember last week one of the points we talked about was everything that has a beginning has a cause, and we talked about the universe having a beginning. So this is kind of what I'm talking about here. He realized from the science he was working out that it implied a beginning to the universe. Now, instead of just accepting this, what he did was he put what's called a fudge factor in his math to essentially account for this issue but still keep the prevailing theory at the time intact. Later they found out that he was correct the first time, but he didn't put this in his original theories. So, why would he do this? Why do you think he would do this? Remember, this is Einstein. Everybody holds him in very high esteem. One of the smartest
The only way he could make it work.
Well,
to keep the president on.
well, I mean, there is that basically he's being presented with something different than what he's been accepting. So he's got to find some way to either accept what he's discovered or make what he already believed fit into the new discoveries. Anybody else got an answer for this one? Okay, so that's on the gist of what I was going for here, is that Einstein saw the implications of what he was working on, but instead of coming out and saying, hey, this implies a beginning, he instead made his work stick with what the status quo was at the time, which at the time, the main theory for the universe was that it was just eternal, that it had always been here, and that it would always be here. And I think this illustrates an issue that scientists face today, and they faced during his time too, is the pressure to stick with the status quo. The pressure to make sure that your evidence, your theories, and your data lines up with what's broadly accepted. This is an issue in astronomy, but it's also a very big issue in biology. Anyone who dares suggest something other than Darwinism, even if it's not related to religion at all, even if it's not design or creation, still gets hammered hard because you're attacking the sacred cow. And so I think this is something to keep in mind when we're talking with people, is that some of these scientific so-called theories are held religiously. They are religious beliefs because that is the creation story for atheism, for example. So there's emotion packed into these things. It's not just, completely objective science. People have their theology riding on these things as well. So there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of backlash, and there's a lot of money involved in academia these days, in scientific discoveries. It's not just pure science like it used to be. Any comments, any questions on this one? All right. Second question. In response to the fine-tuning argument, remember last week the second argument we talked about was fine-tuning evidence in the universe that there had to be some sort of design because of how many things have to go right in order for us to even exist. In response to this argument, one might say that our universe is just one of several universes, and that ours just happens to be the one that would support human life, and so therefore here we are. Now, what's the problem with this hypothesis, or what is a problem? I think there are multiple, but what is a problem that you might consider when dealing with this kind of explanation?
Scientifically, it can't be proven.
That's true, and that's a very important point to bring out. Remember, if you're dealing with someone who claims to have a naturalistic set of beliefs, atheism based on naturalism, by their own beliefs, you have to observe it and be able to test it in order to believe it. We can't observe other universes. Otherwise, it would be part of our universe. That's the whole point, is that the universe is everything there is from our perspective. So if there are multiple universes, you've jumped out of science and you've gone into metaphysics, which is where you discuss philosophy and theology, and where you're talking about God and spirituality. So at that point, the person you're talking to has jumped off the scientific ship, and they're in your waters when it comes to talking about, you know, things beyond science, like we're talking about God creating outside of scientific law. So they're basically dropping their atheism at this point to help prop up their atheism. So you see how it doesn't support itself. It doesn't actually help the argument any. Okay, what about anything else? Any other issues?
Why are they, okay, like if that was right, why are they saying that there being multiple universes? They're saying that that would prove that there's not a God?
Well,
Or,
that God is not necessary.
okay, so why would that prove that God isn't necessary?
So remember from the fine-tuning argument, one of the parts of it was that if the world is either designed, it came into being by chance, or it just exists because it has to exist.
Okay.
And so this is part of that idea of the universe existing by chance. Since it is so highly unlikely, mathematically speaking, probability, you know, like we talked about, since it's so unlikely, what the attempt is to just make more universes. That way
So that
your
it wouldn't be
probability goes
unlikely?
up. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it's less unlikely if you allow for millions of universes.
Stacking the deck.
Yeah, basically you're stacking the deck in your favor. But like we said, you can't prove it. So at that point, it's just my word versus yours if you're arguing over that.
Yes, because you could argue back to them that, well, if there are several universes, maybe God created all of them.
There's that too.
You can't prove that,
Yeah, and
or disprove it.
that's another point on this, is that even if there are, that doesn't explain the first cause requirement we talked about in the last section. You know, the first one, the first cause argument, says that for anything that begins to exist, there must be some sort of cause. Just because you might have multiple universes doesn't mean you can explain the existence of them. Even if we accept it, what designed them or what caused them? So all you're really doing is multiplying the problem, because now you have to find some mechanism to explain all of the universes instead of just one. Any other thoughts on this one? Or any questions?
Uniqueness of our situation in Earth goes against this, because they've surveyed, thousands of light years planets that are in our universe, and so far they have found zero evidence of any life anywhere but right here. I mean, they've looked at all kinds of different scientific data as far as what would show that there was life on some planet somewhere, and they've come up with nothing on every single one of them they found.
Yeah, so you're not actually answering the probability argument, you're just renaming it. You're just painting a different face on it, because now it's not the opportunity of the universe coming into existence, it's which universe did we wind up in. But either way, the probability is still astronomical, because to account for all of the universes that you have for this to happen, you're now running into the same numbers that you ran into the first time. So you're not answering the question, you're just shifting it a little bit. Anything else? Okay. Third question. Remember, we covered 3 topics last week. Third question is about the moral argument. A common objection to the moral argument looks something like this. Either something is good because God commands it, or because God says so, which makes good in a way arbitrary, or God commands something because it is good, which implies that good exists before God, or independently of God. Either way, good becomes independent of God. So how do you answer this objection? And this is practical apologetics right here, because this is a common argument. So you might hear this if you're talking to people. What do you say? You have a quizzical look on your face. Are you thinking, or should I explain the scenario? Okay.
I'm thinking.
It's worded badly, so I just wanted to make sure everybody knew where I was going. Any ideas?
Can you fly through the moral argument real quick?
Okay, the moral argument says that if God does not exist, then no objective morals or objective values or duties would exist. But since we observe objective moral values and we observe objective moral duties, which means morals that exist regardless of your opinion on them, some things are always good and some things are always bad, then God must exist because God has to be the source of it. You can't explain it any naturalistic way. There's no natural basis for morality. That's the moral argument.
Well, there's, you know, thousands of religions in the world, you know, that don't believe in our God. I mean, and they have morals, and they have, I mean, just take Confucius, for example, you know, you have in each culture or religion, however you want to phrase it, has their own set of morals and
Mhm.
what's good or bad.
Okay. And so you have this idea across multiple cultures, multiple nationalities, multiple religious backgrounds of some things are a common thread. There's a common morality in all of them, or most of them, I guess. I won't try to say all, but most at least. Yeah.
But all those religions spur from
This concept.
the original.
Yes. True.
I mean, they're all just perversions of the original religion.
Right.
People have taken it and have added things or subtracted things. That's how we came up with all these different religions in the world.
Right. But the question is trying to avoid that premise.
Of a higher being?
Yes. So basically it's trying to say God can't be the source of good because either what he says is good and that means he picks and chooses and he can say whatever he wants to be is good, or God tells us what to do the good things, which means God acknowledges good beforehand.
He does pick and choose what's good. He is the creator. He determines what is good. He
Okay.
has the authority.
Yes. So how?
So how?
How does he determine?
Because he himself is good.
Boom! There we go. Okay, so this
We missed that.
We
What did
missed
he
it.
say?
So
okay.
Missed the boat.
He is the definition.
I gotta
Of good.
catch on to
He
this.
is the definition
God
of good.
is good. Now this is why this matters.
And you're emulating.
Remember, we talked about staying in control of the conversation. This question comes from not being in control because the atheist is framing the question now. It's a false dilemma. It actually traces back to Plato. It's called Euphoros' dilemma. What it means is, a false dilemma means I'm presenting you two options. And I'm saying either it has to be this or it has to be this, and both are bad. The answer to the dilemma is to cut through it and see that why not be a third alternative? The alternative to this is not that God decides what's good or that God tells us what's already good, but that God, not that he chooses good, but that God is good. It's a manifestation of his nature. You see the difference there? He's not picking and choosing good in that way.
He can't go against it.
He can't go against his own nature. God is good, so
If
by
he
his
goes-
definition, he's
If he
good.
goes against good, then he is associated with sin, because sin is something that's not good.
Right, so
He can't be associated with sin.
So neither one of these objections are valid. We take the third choice that they didn't present to us. There's a third option, but you're not being told about it. So you have to think about it and catch it and bring it out. So what you say is neither one of these are valid because God, by his definition, is good. God doesn't choose good. Good doesn't choose God. They coexist at the same time. They are one.
Or would you not say they're both valid because God is good?
Oh,
I mean-
you wouldn't say these objections are valid because God's not choosing it. It's who God is. Like, I don't choose to be 6'1". I am 6'1". That's kind of what we're talking about here. Is it's God's identity, not his choice. You see what I'm trying to say? Because basically, what the atheist will say is God could say murder is good, you know. And so what they're saying is that good is arbitrary. But we can answer that by saying no, because by God's very definition, that's how good is decided, and how bad is decided by what is not part of God's nature. So God doesn't pick and choose, and he doesn't tell us what's already good, because it's by his very nature. That's the third answer to this. Does that make sense? We good?
Do you have like the last week's stuff for those who had beat out?
Yeah, they're online on the website. I can print them out for you after church as well. Either one.
There's one from-
Yeah, they should be on midwaycoc.org. We've got a button that says classes, and you should be able to find the class from there. Right now, we're the only class listed, so it should be pretty easy.
I won't know what to choose.
Nobody else has taken a
Is
third
there a third
opportunity yet.
option?
Yeah, not even a second option. All right, so for the remainder class, what we want to talk about this week is Creator and Cosmos. We're gonna expand from last week and talk about the universe, the origin of the universe, some different theories and some different talking points people bring up. And we'll touch on Age of the Universe or Age of the Earth a little bit, but it's mostly going to be about origins. So, our universe, there's a few things you can observe very quickly just by thinking about or knowing about the universe. First of all, it is very big. Our universe is very big, as far as we know. It's estimated that the universe is 91 billion light years across. Which means if you're traveling at the speed of light, it would take you 91 billion years to go from one side to the other.
I don't think we're gonna make it.
If that's true, which of course is a little bit of a scientific speculation there because we can't measure it, not with like a yardstick or anything. But if that's true, we can't even conceive of how big that is. It's, no pun intended, astronomical. There's an estimated 100 billion galaxies and 100 or 200 billion stars. Once again, a number so big that we can hardly conceive. There's a lot of stuff out there. And there's an estimated 10 to the 24th power planets. Little pieces of rock floating out there, orbiting suns, orbiting black holes, or getting sucked into black holes, I guess. There's a lot of planets out there. And then there's Pluto, poor Pluto. But not only is our universe big, it's complex. There's complexity. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of detail. It's not just a bunch of rocks sitting down somewhere, it's planets moving, planets orbiting, stars forming and being destroyed and eating themselves up. There's gravity, there's electromagnetism. The laws of physics are very complicated, and I'm sure you guys know that even if you haven't studied it. There's a lot to it. There are nuclear forces, which are the forces that hold atoms together down at the very basic level, that are very complicated. There's a whole lot of intricate details in the universe that we live in. So the question then, for everyone, for every person, is how do you explain the presence of this universe, of this huge conglomeration of everything in existence, and how do you explain the complexity that is inherent in the universe? That there's so much information, there's so much detail, there's just so much to it. What's the explanation?
It's a big accident.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. So, there are a couple of different apologetic issues when talking about the universe. Obviously, the origin of the universe is one of the biggest ones. There's a lot of questions that go into that. First of all, does the universe have an origin? I kind of mentioned that a little bit earlier when we were talking about the question from last week. Is the universe eternal, or is it not eternal? Is it temporal, temporary? Does it have a finite time to it? Is it going somewhere to an end? Did it come from some sort of beginning? Or has it just always been and always will be?
You may have discussed this last week when I wasn't here, but on that eternal or not,
Mm-hmm.
when he says he will destroy the earth,
Mm-hmm.
does he literally mean just the planet Earth or the universe?
Well, in the, I guess in the ultimate sense, you'd have to ask God that. I'd have to,
If you have one question, that's.
yeah, yeah, we have a good place to put that. You can ask David Barker.
We have a card for that.
Yeah, there's cards up
You
here.
say it would be the whole entire universe because when God in the Bible is talking about the stars and he talks about, things of this nature.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of the verses off the top of my head,
Mhm.
but he talks about the stars and all. To me, that's the universe. It's
Yeah,
the
there's-
makeup of it. And he talks about planets
Mm-hmm.
and different verses and such. So to me, when he's saying destroy the earth, that's the entire.
everything.
Well, I mean, there's also
Because
verses
he
in the
created
Bible.
it all on, he created it all on day 4 probably, so it's gotta go.
Right. Well, I mean, you can even if you're unsure on that, because the Bible uses the words world, earth, in different ways depending on different contexts, whether it's prophecy or apocalyptic literature, or whether it's being literal, or it's talking about the earth. And if you're unsure about that, you can even just look at some of the verses in the New Testament that mention the creation. And when you say the creation, that easily sums it up. Anything created is yearning for God. It's in a state of disrepair in a way.
Because further to this earth is the elements will be burned up with fervent heat. Everything's made of the elements.
That's true.
That's good.
The basic foundations of everything we know, if that's destroyed, then everything else is destroyed by logical implication, right? So eternal or not, and also caused or uncaused. Did it just come into being, or was there some sort of cause behind it? The order of the universe, whether it happened by chance or whether it happened by some sort of special design, or if it just exists because it has to exist. And of course, the age of the earth is also hotly discussed. Is the earth young, relatively speaking, or is it old? Thousands of years versus billions of years or millions of years, whatever it may be. So all of these topics kind of come into play when we're talking about this aspect of apologetics.
Yeah. That last one,
Mhm.
I've seen, a lot of course, a lot of times they use the carbon dating methods, they use this, that, and the other.
Right.
But if you accept the premise that God created the universe and everything in it, He could have created it aged to whatever age He wanted it to be, and it has since aged thousands of years.
Right.
Since then.
We'll get into that. I do have that actually later on in the slides, so we will talk about that in a few minutes. So some alternate theories, and these are the ones that you might hear about on TV, on the History Channel, National Geographic, Discovery Channel, any of those, or just in movies or popular TV. Some models, some theories accept a definite beginning to the universe. The Big Bang theory is an example of that, because the idea behind the Big Bang is that there was an event that began the universe. So some of these theories do accept the idea of a beginning. Now, whether that's accepted with a cause or not, we still need to talk about, but at least it does say that the universe has a set age and a set amount of time left. Because those that talk about the Big Bang Theory also mention that the universe is deteriorating at a certain rate as well, so that it's heading towards some cold, dark end. Nice and encouraging, right? Some want to avoid a beginning entirely, however, and that way you can, if you were to prove that, you can avoid the necessity of God, because if the universe has always been here, it doesn't have to have a cause. And remember, our argument is everything that begins to exist has a cause. So if there's no beginning of its existence, you don't need a cause anymore. So there's the eternal or the steady state model, and there's also the oscillating universe, which I'll explain here in a minute. But no matter which of these we're talking about, we also are still dealing with the idea of fine-tuning. That fine-tuning requires some designer. It implies an intelligence behind it. Alright, so just a quick review from last week. Cosmological argument. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Only nothing comes from nothing. And remember, though, when we're saying this, it only applies to what we say has a beginning. It begins to exist. We say then that the universe had a beginning, which we'll be talking about in a minute. And if you combine those two together, then you come to the conclusion, the only conclusion, the universe must have had a cause. And of course, we would say that cause is God. So, Big Bang Theory. You've all probably heard of this one. You might have watched the TV show or listened to the Styx album. But basically, the idea behind the Big Bang Theory models is a cosmic expansion. And by cosmic, we mean the whole universe. Expansion, we mean coming out from a point. Thermodynamics, which talks about the amount of heat and energy in the universe, implies that there has to be some sort of singularity point. Because we have less energy in the universe now than we did 10 years ago, for example, or 2,000 years ago. So therefore, if you follow this idea, let's say we're here now, and we had less energy yesterday, and we had less energy the day before. You follow it to its logical end, you hit what's called a singularity, which is a single point. And that's where they're coming from when they say this, is they're saying, okay, this is where we started, and this is where we've come to. And eventually, the idea is it's all going to come to an end. So it points to a finite past. It points to a past that has a certain time, certain number attached to it. And this one is based on observations and also, of course, theories formulated in the 1900s. You've heard of the Hubble telescope. Mr. Hubble was involved in the formulation of this theory. Now, the Big Bang Theory is accepted by some religious people, and we'll talk about that towards the end, but the universe does show some sort of age. We can admit that, anyone can admit that, because that can be scientifically observed. However, this suggestion does not avoid a first cause. You still have the first cause issue, because at the singularity, if there is such a singularity, you're not explaining where it came from. You're just explaining where it started. You haven't explained why yet. You've just explained how. So you're still dealing with that first cause thorn in the side that we talked about. And in fact, I guess a quick mention, a lot of these books that I've been using as supplemental material, most apologetics folks that I've read from outside of the Lord's Church, but in the religious world, tend to take the Big Bang approach. I haven't really read from any of them why exactly. They haven't really defended that. They just kind of take it for granted. So maybe it's just because they're just following what scientists say on that regard. But anyway, if you read some of these things, do watch out for that, because they just kind of accept the Big Bang Theory. The good thing is, though, that it aligns with the cosmological argument in a way. Even though you still have the first cause that we're worrying about, it still points to the beginning, so it helps that premise. So if you're talking to somebody, remember a few weeks ago I talked about pick your battles, that you might be selective in how you approach somebody based on the objections they have. You can avoid talking about the Big Bang Theory at first if that's necessary. Because if they can accept the beginning, then you can work from there, and then later on work your way back if you're talking about the actual origin. All right, the eternal or steady state model basically kind of speaks for itself. The idea is that the universe has just always existed. It's always been here, and it will always be here. This was more popular before the Big Bang Theory was developed, and it was more popular before the early 1900s. This is the theory that Einstein was clinging to when he fudged his numbers in his theories, because that was the commonly accepted theory of the day. So he pandered to the commonly accepted scientific theory, and it had been accepted for centuries. Now, the problem with the eternal model is that basically it conflicts with thermodynamics. And there's been some debate, even just this year, about whether the universe is actually expanding or not. But regardless of that, thermodynamics is still an issue, because thermodynamics says we're running out of energy. The problem then is that in order to run out of energy, you had to have a certain number of it at some point before. If the universe is eternal, then we either would have run out of energy by now, or there would be infinite energy. Now, there's a problem too with infinite time. If it's eternal, that means it's always been here, which means there is no past, which means there's no time measurement. So here's a nice little example from one of the books. It's called Hilbert's Hotel. Basically, Hilbert's Hotel is a thought experiment. Let's say that you had infinite people come to Hilbert's Hotel and stay for a night. Infinite people. And Hilbert's Hotel just happened to have infinite rooms. So if all the people go into the hotel and check in, is it okay? Yeah, he's got the rooms for them, right? He's got space. He has infinite rooms for infinite people. But here's the problem. Let's say the next day someone comes along and needs a room. Well, they come to the desk and he says, yeah, I have infinite rooms. There's room for you. So they get a room and they stay in the hotel. Now you have one more than you did yesterday, but since it's infinity, there's still space.
What?
The problem is that infinity is not mathematically defined. Infinity is not a number, it's a concept. And so there's no physical manifestation of infinity. You can't have infinite puppies. You can't have infinite pizza, no matter how much we might want it. You can't have infinite coffee, no matter how much David wants it. And you can't have infinite time, because you can't have infinite events. It's absurd. It does not work physically. Were you going to say something?
Well, the book I read one time was trying to explain that. It was somebody trying to explain it to a child and said, think of the biggest number you can think of.
Mm-hmm.
Now add one to it.
Yeah.
Now add another one to it.
Yeah.
Now add another one to it. Now add and when you'll never get to the end, because when you get to the end, you'll have just as far to go as you did.
Exactly. You can add infinity to infinity, but you're still get infinity. So it doesn't. Mathematics breaks down if you accept infinity as a real number. That's the problem. Is it's trying to suggest infinite time, but it doesn't stand up. It's not science. You could have another person come in every day for infinite years, but then when all the people leave, you still only have infinite people leaving. So, anyway, it's just a little bit of a thought experiment to kind of prove why this does not make any sense. The steady state model was suggested sometime in the mid-20th century, but it's basically just the eternal model reason. It didn't hold any traction, nobody really accepted it, and it's been dead ever since. Isn't this fun? The oscillating universe. This one is common with Buddhists and with some atheists, and I think with some Hindus. So, the idea of the oscillating universe takes the idea of expansion from the Big Bang. But what it says is that the universe is constantly expanding and then contracting. And it expands and it contracts. And it says that it does that infinitely. And if you do that, then you can get away from the idea of a first cause, because it's just been expanding and contracting ever since. You don't have to explain, for example, a Big Bang theory, because it's just been going on forever. It attempts to avoid the singularity we talked about a minute ago, a little cone. The problem, well, there's a couple problems. First of all, you don't have enough energy in the universe to do this, because in order to contract, that takes energy that you've already been losing when you've expanded. Remember, as the universe supposedly expands, you're losing energy. So if that's true, then you won't have the energy to go back to where you were and start all over again. Also, again, thermodynamics, you're getting increasing entropy, increasing disorder in the universe if you have increasing expansion. So what happens is, if you actually follow the oscillating theory scientifically, as far as the size of the universe, for example, instead of having a normal, back and forth forever, you get a wild jump because you get increasing disorder. So every time you're expanding a little bit more because you have more disorder. Now, why does this kill this idea? Well, yeah, it's exploding, but it's getting bigger and bigger. So if you look at it the other way, what?
Increasing disorder, you can never go back to the origin anyway.
Well, this is the problem. Instead of it being steady for all time, you've gone back to a singularity, which is the whole thing that they're trying to avoid with this theory. But by looking at this, you have to go back to some 0 point, which is what they say in the Big Bang Theory when they accept a beginning. So you can't avoid a beginning with this theory. It doesn't do any good to disprove the cosmological argument.
It's in theory, but it's not realistic.
Of course not.
You can never get back to the singularity, because the increasing disorder will prevent you from ever getting there.
Well, yeah. I mean, these are some of the issues faced with this kind of model. You can't physically get this nice little forever oscillation. You're going to blow up into an instability, or you're going to start out at some singularity.
So how do they just ignore that?
Well,
It's like everything else, they just don't talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't acknowledge thermodynamics, you can get away with anything. Basically, though, you see that in what people call string theory, and that's going to be you probably won't see this from a whole lot of people unless they're really into physics. But string theory is kind of what's pointing towards these kinds of models.
I think the common denominator is that everything's a theory,
Yeah.
and they can't prove any of it. So
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the multiverse model. You can't observe extra universes. At that point, you're just talking about things that might be or might not be, but you can't say either way. And that, once again, you're no longer being a naturalist if you're resorting to that. You might as well be religious in that case. They just have a different religion. Okay, quick word on fine-tuning. We talked about this a little bit, but the idea is that the Earth couldn't have happened by chance. And this is called the anthropic principle, where the universe is tailor-made for humans to live. Anthro refers to people or humans. Anthropology means a study of humans, for example. So anthropic means that the universe is designed for people, that there's a design that makes it possible for us to live specifically. This book by Hugh Ross, he's an astrophysicist who believes in God, who believes in Jesus. He wrote this Creator in the Cosmos. He did the calculations on 128 different things that have to be exactly right for a life to exist in the universe. Now, mathematician in the back, what do you do with a bunch of probabilities when you're trying to find the total probability? Do you add them up?
Sure. I know what you asked.
Oh, so let's say you have a bunch of separate probabilities, a bunch of separate events, and you're trying to see how to get them all to happen at once. What's the math behind that? Oh, okay, well, you multiply them together, right? If you're trying to pick a green marble.
I'm not sure where this is going,
Oh.
Ian, so
Well,
I'm kind of wondering.
sorry.
You took this in physics, Corey, come on.
So the idea is what he did is when you're taking all these probabilities together, you have to multiply the numbers together. So you're getting increasingly smaller and smaller chances every time you add another idea into the equation. So if it's the location of the Earth, if it's the location of the moon, all these things, the more you add to the equation, the smaller your chances get, until he wound up with 1 in 10 to the 166th power chance of life happening on Earth. Now remember, earlier in class I said there's only 10 to the 24th planets in our universe, which means you need like 1 to the 140th power universes just to have Earth happen once by accident.
Well, just look at the angle where the Earth is tilted on the axis.
That's one of them, yes.
1 degree either way.
Exactly.
We can't.
That's the point, is we're living on a razor's edge. If one little thing goes wrong in any of those 128 different parameters, life doesn't exist. All of it has to happen at the same time.
Anything over 10 to the 50th is considered to be absolutely impossible anyway.
Yeah?
You want to make those movies about what if a giant asteroid slammed into the Earth and knocked it out?
Yeah. There's not enough planets in our universe, or even billions of universes, for this to happen by chance. And that's why they go to the multi-world hypothesis. Your answer then is the firing squad analogy. Let's say you stood in front of a firing squad and 100 people shot at you, and they all missed, and you were still alive. Okay? You're going to wonder, why did that happen? You're not just going to accept it because it was unlikely. You're going to say, something must have rigged my chances at surviving because it was such a small chance. So it doesn't answer the probability problem. Okay, last thing, real quick, age of the Earth. There's old Earth creationism and there's young Earth creationism, and I would assume most of us in here are young Earth creationists. Old Earth creationists take a figurative reading of Genesis 1 through 10. So basically they view the story of creation, up till the story of the flood, all as being a story, figurative, for a moral lesson. And they take the scientific explanation that the universe is 14 billion years old. They usually either revert to the day-age theory or the gap theory to explain this. The day-age theory means when in Genesis it says that God created the world in 6 to 7 days, that day actually means a very long expanse of time. The gap theory means that it says in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, then there's billions of years, then verse 2 happens.
bring up that they mentioned this and they talk about the carbon dating, and you ask them which version of carbon dating they're talking about.
Yeah, that's true.
Because it's been revised at least 3 times.
Right. But even in addition to that, there are a few more defenses. First of all, the Hebrew word for day, yom, in the Bible, it's almost always meant to use to mean a 24-hour literal day. And we see in Genesis it says evening and morning, the first day. It can, in some cases, mean a longer expanse of time, but that's only used maybe one or 2 or 3 times in the Old Testament, and it's all dependent on the context. So if you read it in context, that's the only conclusion you can come to. There's also some New Testament references, and like Jeff mentioned earlier, apparent age of the universe. Did God make babies and eggs, or did he make human adults and chickens? He made mature adults. He made mature animals. Why couldn't he have made a mature universe? So when I drew the cone earlier, who's to say that God couldn't have started right there? He's got it. He can start wherever he wants to. So this could be, the Big Bang could be an implication, but we could have actually started at this point and just not know it. All right, 3 questions. Y'all should have gotten those. Actually, I guess I didn't hand them out, but that's all I got. So thank you guys.